Hi, everybody. So I'm here today with my awesome Packer mask on. So I'm guessing you can probably tell what day that I filmed this. I'm actually in the teacher's lounge right now, and hopefully I figured out the little issue that we've had with trying to get my face on my videos because I feel like it's helpful, and I can give a couple of examples here and there if I have an opportunity. So hopefully this fixes the problem. Took me a whole 2 minutes to find out that uninstalling it and reinstalling it is a pretty good thing. And considering I've known that with computers since I was like 6 years old, I'm actually kind of embarrassed, but it is what it is. All right, so today's lesson, Wednesday, we're talking about the land changing hands, and now Minnesotans, and by that I mean European Americans mostly, are going to be expanding out into the Minnesota area before it becomes a state. So yesterday we brought up a pretty negative part of Minnesota's history, right? The idea that a lot of this land that they came into was either done by tricking or flat out lying to Native Americans to part with their land for money that most often didn't come in the way that it was promised. Okay, so we're going to talk about after that is in the process, but we'll say that it's the next step from the United States getting this land from natives to now all of a sudden sending people out there. Now, you can do a lot of things, but let's face it, if you have a place that is not very convincing and you can't get people to move out there, you are not going to populate it, right? There needs to be a reason that somebody wants to move out to a specific area. Like I moved to Minnesota from my home state and my area that I lived in Eau Claire because I heard that there were better teaching opportunities in Minnesota than there were in my home state, which is absolutely true, right? I had a reason. Fiance also asked me to, and she's from Farmington, so that was another reason, right? But you're not going to do it just to do it. There really isn't any reason for that, right? There needs to be, it's human condition. You have to do something that makes sense to you to benefit yourself. That makes sense. So this is kind of what we're getting at when we look at the warm up here. When you're trying to convince your parents that you need the new version of the iPhone. I actually just got a new phone last weekend, and I had to convince my fiance that it was time for us to get new ones because my old one was a piece of crud. So I thought this would be interesting. I'd love to hear it. But for your assignment that we're going to do for tomorrow, it's going to be really important that we understand this idea of trying to convince or persuade an audience to believe the same as you do. Okay. So you know the drill with this. You've got the notes here. Once again, if you can, I just cannot stress it enough. Please print them. If you can't, go ahead. You go into here, hit file, make a copy, and then you'll hit OK. You can rename it whatever you want because it's your copy now. And you'd hit OK, and then you have your own copy to write on. Okay, so if you're going to do it that way online, make sure you grab the tab, move it all the way over to split screen it. And then this would be where you'd have the video on the left-hand side. Okay. All right. Well, that being said, I am going to pull up my PowerPoint and we'll get started. I haven't taken notes in a few days. All right. So here we got a covered wagon. This would have been the main mode of transportation for people that were not very wealthy to move to these new areas and settle their families. So until about 1850, most of the people that were in the Minnesota area, or what we know today as Minnesota, were either Ojibwe or Dakota. They were Native Americans, right? But between 1850 and 60 is when we see a huge population boom of white Americans, whether it's people that came from the East or if it's people that came from another country and settled here. Obviously, the Minnesota Vikings are here, and the reason why they're known as the mascot is because Minnesota has a very high population of people from Norway and Sweden, which used to be the people that were known today as the Vikings. So that's the reason why that name is there. And also during this time, there were a lot of people that emigrated or came to the United States from those areas. And as we know, we're going to have these treaties, and eventually people are going to start occupying these areas that they get from the treaties. Let's see if I can get this to work. Oh, there we go. Cool. So just really quickly here, I found this awesome graphic of what Minnesota's population started to look like. So I think as we go through this, I'll just kind of read off of here and you can take a look. So this right here, see if we can start 1850. All right, perfect. So right where it was asking us to start, right? So as you're going to see here, the green is basically unpopulated. Once you get these spots, that I believe is going to be 100 people. It might be 1,000, but as you can see, there we go. There's the creation of the Twin Cities right there, right? That's unmistakable. It's right there in our area, and it just grew massively to start. All right, so we'll keep watching. Remember, this is the population of white Americans. It is not the population of Native Americans. In fact, Native Americans, unfortunately, are probably decreasing during this time. Anything that you see on the Minnesota River here, this is probably going to be the Dakota reservation that they're moved off to in the Traverse des Sioux. So before the treaties of Traverse des Sioux and Mendota were signed in 1851, about 6,000 Europeans only were living in Minnesota. By 1854, their number increased to about 30,000. So if we do a percentage, that's a 500% increase in just 3 years. And obviously, this was deliberate. They were trying to get people out there. By 1857, their population topped 150,000. That's another five-fold increase, right? So it's climbing at a steady rate. Between 1849 and 58, Minnesota was the fastest growing place in the United States. And it had become one of the most popular destinations because there were a whole bunch of things that were provided or given to people as opportunities that caused them to say, hey, maybe this is a dang good idea to move out here. Now, before we get this big population boom, Minnesota needs to try to organize and find a plan to get people to move here. So right before that big explosion that we talked about in 1848, there are going to be 61 men, all men, right? Unfortunately, women were not usually allowed to participate in politics at this time. And they met in the growing lumber town of Stillwater. Now, Stillwater was really important because it was an outlet to the Mississippi, well, the St. Croix, which would lead to the Mississippi River, right? So people were there, they were loggers, and they decided, hey, we've got an opportunity now that we're clearing out all this land to get people to come in and live here full time. Now, what they needed to do is they needed to convince the American government that they could set up a territory out there. And they needed someone who was very wealthy, very powerful, and someone who was well connected. And they settled on this guy named Henry Sibley, and he was a former fur trader. And he's about ready to change businesses, right? He wanted to go from fur, which was starting to lose its popularity, to somebody who was going to be a politician, someone who was going to be a leader of this new territory. And it's going to be called Minnesota after the Dakota word for cloudy or very, very clear, so you can see clouds in it, water. So this would have been what you would see as a place like Stillwater back in the day. Just imagine if you looked over the St. Croix Bridge and saw this. People would have cut logs at the time, and then they would send these logs down the river so that they could get processed at a sawmill. Now, you would stamp the log that you cut, and then they would write that down at the sawmill and then compensate you for what you gave them. So we have a few things here, and this is going to be a brainstorm. So if you're doing your assignment later, this is a really good idea to get ideas and brainstorm for what you're going to do. Okay. So if you're listening right now, this is very important. What are opportunities for people? Well, people need jobs. So the entire area of Minnesota up in that northeastern corner is all trees, right? So logging is going to be an incredibly popular industry, and you can get a lot of people up there and pay them pretty handsomely for doing that job. Now, this is the northeastern corner of Minnesota, and we know it today, actually, even still, as the Mesabi Range. But we also, Mesabi is just another word for iron. This is the Iron Range in Minnesota, right? Iron made metal goods, and they were still in very, very high demand at that time. So this is going to be a very popular place for people to show up and get a job mining iron. Now, this demand is going to get even higher when the way that steel was produced is perfected to be super cheap and be way stronger than old iron. So Minnesota will have a huge boom once this change in the steel industry happens. And then lastly, once you clear out all of these areas, and also in the plains too, but once you clear out these areas in the coniferous and deciduous forest, you've got all of this rich soil that's going to provide for great farmland, right? And there are a whole bunch of people that are living back out east that are already farmers, and they want to move to a place where they can get a bigger farm, they can grow even more and make even more money. So there's also that opportunity, right? There's a whole bunch of jobs, there's wide open land, and above all, it's a brand new place for somebody who may not have a lot, like an immigrant, to move out there and have a chance with very, very little. Okay, there's a whole bunch of things, but they need to get the word out, right? And as we're going to talk about, there are a bunch of people that actually write advertisements to come out and move to this new territory. And that's going to be your assignment for today's exit ticket, is going to be writing a paragraph trying to convince people that it's a good idea to move out to Minnesota. I think it'll be a pretty decent assignment. Okay, now the reason why are they trying so hard to get people to move out there? Well, because they want it to become an official territory of the United States. And later, obviously, they want it to become a state. But the first thing you need to do is a territory. So in order to become a territory, they needed to have 5,000 adults. There needed to be a group of people living in the region, and they had to elect a non-voting representative to U.S. Congress. Okay. Now, eventually, we know who that is. That's going to end up being Henry Sibley, who will eventually become the first governor of Minnesota, too. But the United States has to pass a law creating the territory. Well, why would they do that? Oh, well, I already know. And so do you, because what does Minnesota have the starting point of? The most important waterway in the United States? Mississippi River, right? So why wouldn't you want it to become a territory? You want to have that spot where the most important artery out into the Gulf of Mexico begins. So it was very easy. The United States passed it, no problem. They definitely wanted Minnesota to become a territory. So for tomorrow, let's take a look at your exit ticket. Pretend you are a writer living in the eastern United States. You are being paid to write an advertisement to get people to the Minnesota area. Write a paragraph starting with the phrase, "Come one and all to Minnesota." So you're going to start out with saying that, and you are going to highlight all of the perks, all of the reasons why it would be such a great idea to move to Minnesota. Okay, and here are your options, things that might help you in order to have a better paragraph that's going to be more convincing. Things that you can consider: land prices, right? Supply is going to be super high. So that means that you're going to have low prices of land for people to expand out there and get bigger farms than they would have normally had. There's going to be available jobs, right? And we talked about that in different areas. There's going to be treaties with Native Americans, meaning that land is plentiful right now. And there are going to be trees and there's going to be wilderness available, which is going to either A, provide jobs, B, provide money, or C, it's going to provide a nice landscape for people to live, right? So there you go. That's your assignment for today. It's writing a paragraph. Come one and all to Minnesota. All right. Once you're done with that, go ahead and submit it. And then you're done with social studies for the day. Then we will start the next day with Minnesota going from a territory to a state. All right. Have yourselves a wonderful day. We'll see you tomorrow.